everyone, and welcome back to the Social Work Bubble. I am your host, Laura. I am an LMSW here in New York State. Today, we are joined by an amazing social worker, Anna. So she's here today to talk all about switching roles in social work. She has experience in child protective services and is now a medical social worker. Really interesting transition. Thank you so much, Anna, for coming on today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Now, as we get started, do you want to tell the listeners just like a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing in social work?
Yes, so I am a social worker in the state of Kentucky, and a little bit, I guess, in Indiana too. It's a little complicated. But I became a social worker at the age of 20. I worked for Child Protective Services until I was 22, and then switched over to medical social work, and then I turned 23. So I got my career started a little bit early, but it has been amazing. It's been amazing to kind of grow up in adulthood, and experience real life out of college, but also, trying to juggle also, being an adult, fresh graduate. So, I'm just happy to be here.
How exciting. I'm wondering, because I asked this question to everyone, like what kind of brought you to social work? Because I have noticed for a lot of people, everyone's journey is very different. Sometimes it's like, oh, I just happened upon it. But what's your experience?
Oh, funny, a little bit funny. So all throughout, I was your typical little child, I want to be a doctor, nurse, all
Yeah.
that, big stuff, teacher. But I've always kind of knew that I wanted to help people. And especially I loved working with children. I babysat, I worked with, after school programs. I've always been hands-on with children. So I always kind of struggled of like, how can I help people, but especially help children? So when I was in middle school, I wanted to be a band director, completely different than social work. I was involved with bands, all that music stuff. And that was the way, I could help students, I could help children through music. I got to high school and that changed a little bit. I had an amazing high school math teacher and I loved math, and I was just like, I'm going to major in mathematics. Even bigger difference than social work. And in high school, I really struggled, I really wanted to do something with math, but also I still wanted to do something in music. So then I found music therapy a little closer to, that social work therapy area. Yeah. And then eventually I was like, I don't think I want to do music. I don't think I want to do music therapy. I think I just want to major in mathematics, go like a high school math teacher, that kind of area. And I stuck with that for a year. So by my time I was in my junior year. So my senior year comes around, still going to major in mathematics. It was spring break. So maybe it was like 2 months before graduation, applied to colleges as a math major, everything. And I went on a campus tour to eventually the university I graduated from. And I just got on their website right before you went. And I was just like, I don't think mathematics is where I want to go. And I saw where they had a social work program. So I just looked at it and I was just like, I think I want to do social work.
That's amazing.
So, the next day I went to my campus visit. I sat down with like the admissions. I was like, I think I want to go here for college for sure, but I actually want to change my major from mathematics to social work. They're like, okay. From that moment forward, that week later after spring break, I went to my guidance counselor. I was like, so I know what college I'm going to, but I did change my major to social work. And she just kind of looked at me like, we're like a month away from graduation. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like it's more me.
Good for you.
Yes, right? And I ran with it. Everything turned to social work. I went to university, and I stuck with social work. Obviously my little career paths, my specialized programs, what I wanted to do in social work changed. But it was always social work. So that's really how I became a social worker.
Oh my gosh, what a journey.
Yes.
Wow. That's so funny because I feel like for a lot of people, like social work really isn't on their radar. Like we have those other ideas of like helping people, teaching,
Hmm.
nursing, medical field. And then we kind of, again, like happen upon social work. It's like, oh, is this it? Is this what I've been looking for?
Yes.
Awesome. Now you started off in child protection.
Hmm.
How did that happen? Like what, what did you get into that?
So I always knew that I wanted to work with children. I just didn't, obviously, you have children, aging,
Hmm.
all these special fields in social work. I always knew it was children.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember having a firm conversation with one of my good friends from college, because we all went around the room and we said, what fields do we want to work with and what we don't want to work with. Um, and mine was always children. And the one field I didn't really want to work with was aging.
Hmm.
And now here we are as a medical social worker. Um, so I always knew it was children. And then my university participated in a program called Public Child Welfare Certification Program. It's actually through the state. So it's kind of like a program that teachers, engineers do, where the state kind of pays for you tuition. You have certain criteria, and in return, you work for them for 2 years. So,
Hmm.
and essentially there's about 8 to 10 universities in the state of Kentucky that is involved with this program. You have to meet certain requirements, good GPA. You have to take 2 classes in regards to child welfare, child
Hmm.
protective services, and then go to trainings. And you have this big interview process, and then you're eventually selected. And then in return, you work for them for 2 years. So that's ideally how I got into child protective services.
Oh, wow. What was your experience like? Because I feel like I hear a lot.
Yes. Um, it was, I do not regret my experience at all. It truly was for the benefit of the good for me because it gave me security after I graduated college with my bachelor's. Because I feel like sometimes when you graduate with your bachelor's of social work, it's very hard to find a job freshly graduate with only your
100%.
bachelor's with no experience
Hmm.
other than going into, child protective services. So it was good because by the time I graduated, I interviewed already for like 5 counties.
Hmm.
Shortly after I graduated, 2 weeks later, I got the location that I wanted to. I did my practicum there, so it was better suit for me. And when you think about it, 2 years is not really a long time
No.
compared to when you're actually doing it. And it was the shortest but longest 2 years of my life.
Hmm.
I'm very grateful for my experience.
Hmm.
And I think that if, how do I say this? If the system was set up in a way to also protect our workers, I
Hmm.
would have stayed longer. But I know for my mental health, for my personal life, for my situation that I went through, it was better for me to leave after my 2 years. And that was
Yeah.
always my goal, because I knew that I wanted something better for
Hmm.
myself. And I'm not trying to be selfish in the way of my job at that time was to protect children. And I know I did to the best ability and with the system working that I was working with.
Hmm.
But I knew that I could help children and protect them in other ways.
Hmm.
So I knew from very day one that this was not a job that I was going to retire in. And I don't think it would ever be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking about it and it's stressing me out. I do
Yes,
wonder. Oh, go ahead. Mhm.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because I'm in New York State, I'm wondering if the majority of your coworkers were also social workers or like if they had other kind of training. Because here in New York, you don't have to be a social worker to work in CPS. You do like a 6-month training and that's it. And so some people are social workers and come from that background but a lot of them aren't. What was your experience?
So for the state of Kentucky, obviously they would want you to have a degree in social work, but they also accepted psychology, sociology,
Hmm.
criminal justice, stuff like in that field.
Hmm.
There was certain times where, if you did apply, they would take it up on application like by application, but those were the primary fields that you had to have a degree in.
Interesting, which makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, can you describe kind of what your typical day or week was? I know on a day-to-day basis things can really change, but what was that like for you in CPS?
Oh my goodness, where did I even begin? I was actually, when I accepted the job, I was hired on as an investigator.
Mhm.
But workers quit, that whole
Yeah.
cycle. So I ended up being a generic worker for majority of my time. And then I slowly rotated into just being a ongoing worker, which was funny because when I did my practicum, I mainly shadowed an investigator. So that's what I wanted to
Mm.
do. Um, but my week primarily consisted of being in the car, going to
Yeah.
home visits, traveling. I worked for a very rural area in Kentucky, which like the biggest nearest city was like an hour away.
Mm.
So the lack of resources was,
Yeah.
it's Kentucky. It was very small. There's a little bit neighboring bigger counties, but the closest city was an hour away.
Mm.
So and it was very rural, very country. A lot of places didn't have Wi-Fi for schooling or, they didn't have service. So it was it was a lot of driving to, not just in my county, but other surrounding counties, wherever a child was placed in.
Mhm.
I had to drive an hour and a half for one like visit between children and their parents.
Mhm.
So it was a lot. I had court, whether that was at my home county or in another county, because we also helped out other counties. On call was about like a week at a time, and we rotated it through 3 different counties, so we weren't on call like every other day or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, Phone calls, court reports. A standard day for me would be emails, driving to home visits, trying to get to another other home visit on time or
Mhm.
but also primarily visits. I had a lot of visits either in the morning or afternoon and more than one a day. So it was a lot of, making sure if I needed someone to cover my visit, I had coverage.
Mhm.
Also just typing court reports, trying to stay on top of it. But also as an ongoing worker, I was in charge for those who were in foster care,
Mhm.
creating what we call presentation summaries. Once they're ready for that adoption process. And that presentation summary is basically like a book. So it was a lot of meetings, home visits, a lot of things from day to day to by week.
Yeah. Wow. That is a full, that's a full schedule. Um,
Yes.
oh my gosh. I'm wondering too, I guess like with home visits, how was that?
It was eventful for some of them. We were
Mhm.
lucky enough to have tablets that were
Okay.
like by service. So we were able to sit down, type our home visits out right there.
Mhm.
Some home visits were, pretty quick and easy. You got in, you got out. You always have those that kind of just want to talk to you. So they lasted
Yeah.
a long time. There's home visits where no one would answer. I remember I would have to bring, our state police department out with me for this one home visit because no one would answer me. And, it was just like, it's that time of the month. I'm going to call our local state police. They're going to come out with me. Um, so it was a lot of that or, primarily for my safety, but also, and maybe they were able to get to the client where I wasn't. So it was a lot of, I never really knew what my home visits were going to be sometimes just because of, time, how long are they going to keep me for, but also
Yeah.
at every home visit, I want to make sure that I'm involved with my family that I'm with.
Mm.
So, it's hard sometimes to schedule home visits back to back to back
Mm.
because you're like, I don't know how long I'm going to be there in reality. How long is it going to take me to drive? So I always wanted to make sure that I was able to really build rapport with my families,
Mhm.
but also be a little bit professional, like, staying an hour or more was, a little too long.
Yeah.
Um, but just trying to really build a rapport because at the end of the day, I'm their social worker.
Hmm.
And I want them to be able to, trust me to a point where I could trust them and vice versa. So it's really about building rapport, but also checking in and monitoring them and seeing how far they've came.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a totally random question, but I remember, I think when I was in, at some point in undergrad, I shadowed, I was like a foster care intern because I wanted to go in like the child welfare route. And we were in the car a lot doing like home visits, just how you're describing. Were you like compensated? Like, were you given, did you have to use your own car? Were you compensated for gas? Like, what was that like?
So we were compensated for gas, but also for the state of Kentucky, they at least give you a state vehicle.
Oh, okay.
Depending on how big your office was, mattered how many cars you got. But I was in a very rural county. So we had out of the 2 years I was there, I would say 80% of that 2 years, there was only two workers, me and another worker just doing field work, not including our supervisor.
Oh,
Yeah. So then eventually we had three. So how we kind of balanced out the car was whoever was driving the furthest got the car, or what they were doing. If they were doing a removal, they would get the state car. If
mm,
they were going, depending on if it was ideal for them to come back to the office, get their car, drive home, what that kind of looks like. But those were our two main factors: was who's going the furthest and what are they doing.
mm-hmm.
If I was going the furthest, but I was just doing my monthly home visit, and it was, depending on the family I was doing, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But my coworker was going, she was closer to our office, but she didn't really feel that comfortable. If she didn't feel that comfortable, I would let her take that car, whatever that looks like. So it was kind of based on scenario,
Mm-hmm.
of why would we need the car.
Wow, that's rural.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yes,
gosh. Okay. That really paints a picture. Thank you.
it does.
Now, I
Yes.
think this is so interesting, but I want to make sure that we get enough time for everything else. So you eventually, I mean, you were at CPS for 2 years and then you transitioned to hospital social work, medical social work, what you're doing now. What influenced your decision to leave CPS and go into medical social work?
Like I said, I always kind of knew that once my 2 years was up, the chances of me leaving were very, very high.
Yeah.
Um, Even before I started, I knew that the system had its flaws. And I think that's per state.
Hmm.
Um, they just have their flaws. My issues, they would have taken, maybe they were able to get them fixed while I've been gone. I don't know. But I always knew essentially that I would leave due to the fact was I knew that this was not a job I would retire in. Simple
Yeah.
as that. So because I was on a contract, I kind of knew when I wanted to start looking for jobs, kind of just get my toes a little wet. So I started looking at jobs. I left the first week of June. So I started looking about March and April.
Hmm.
And I just really looked. I told myself, um, I don't, and while I was at my CPS job, I did my master's at some point, and
Hmm.
I had to drop out due to some personal issues in my life. So when I was applying for jobs, I told myself, I know that I don't have a MSW. I know that,
Hmm.
but I do know that I have 2 years of experience.
Absolutely.
And in the end of it, that experience also counts for something. And I worked for Child Protective Services, and that has given me more experience than it could give anyone. I feel like we've
Hmm.
done everything in this field. Um, so when I looked and when I really wanted to start applying, I found a job as a social worker at a hospital, and it was only PRN, so as needed. But I told myself I'm gonna at least apply to get myself
Yeah.
out there. It was the first application I think I put in, and I said if it's, I'll apply, I'll interview, whatever I need to do. And if I feel like I need to do it, I'll do it. So I applied for that. I applied for other positions, that I felt like I really wanted to. I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to go into, but I really didn't know.
Hmm.
Um, so I applied for the hospital job. I interviewed, I applied, I did everything, did all the interviews, turned in my resignation before I even had a
Woo!
job. And was offered the job. And I was like, okay, well, this is PRN. So I'm going to take it. It's the first job offer. I already put in my resignation. Um, and I took it. It was not something I ever thought I would want to do whenever, I'm thinking of, what I want to do after CPS. It was never,
Hmm.
ever medical social work, ever. But now that I'm in it, it's been really refreshing, for not just my mental health, but I was able to really understand like what my mental health went through, and now reflecting on it. And it's no one's fault, none of my coworkers. It's no one's fault. It's not even my fault. But like looking back on it, I'm like, that should have been a sign that like I was struggling with my mental health,
Hmm.
to the point where now, I don't stress as much. We all stress in every single job, but on Sunday nights, I'm not like, oh dang, I have to go to work tomorrow.
What a
It's kind of
feeling!
like, yeah, it's a great feeling to have. Of course, I'm like, oh dang, it's Sunday, but because the weekend's over, but I'm
Hmm.
not, and I say that and then I probably will go to work tomorrow. I'm like, man, I don't want to be here, but it's a different kind of stress. I
Yeah.
don't feel, like when I was working with CPS, I was struggling so bad that I was, throwing up stomach acid so much. Like I was physically
Oh
sick
my
from it.
gosh.
I obviously still have some episodes now, but I was going to the doctor, like trying to figure it out. But I know that it was from like my mental health, my stress, my anxiety, all of that stuff. I still have episodes now, but it's not every single morning. It's
Yeah.
not when I'm about to go to court for a big court hearing. It's very well more controlled now that I feel like.
I mean, that's incredible. You have to take care of yourself in that way. I mean,
Hmm.
people don't realize like that level of stress. I mean, it's physically impacting you with something like that, and you have to step away and just take care of yourself.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh my. I'm so glad you did.
Yes, me too.
Wow. Now, what does your typical day look like now in hospital social work?
So since I've accepted that job as a PRN, I did look for other jobs because I'm like, I do need something full time. I told myself I'll start my master's again. I'll, take this break a little bit for myself. And then in September, I was offered a full-time position at the hospital. So I've been full-time there since.
Woohoo!
Yes. But now that I work, at the hospital, there's about 2 to 3 social workers that's full time. And then we're partnered with a case manager, a nurse. And we kind of facilitate any referrals that are going to nursing homes, whether that's for long term, or rehab, anyone that's from a prison or jail, any mental health problems. We help facilitate like a telehealth assessment
Hmm.
through a mental health provider. We do consults for like resources, substance abuse, um, resources for mental health. And we do mother baby, for delivering moms. And that's about our day to day. We kind of follow them, set up transportation for when they're ready to go home. And we also provide them any transportation or resources they need in the county that I work in now. But
Hmm.
also we help with, any family mediation if needed. But also just trying to like comfort the patient, they're in the hospital. It's not a good time for them, but also trying to get them through it. And just being encouraging and advocating for whatever they may need now.
Wow. How is your caseload compared to what it was in child protection?
Um, it varies day to day.
Mhm.
When I left Child Protective Services, I was, I want to say maybe 25 20 to 25 cases.
Hmm.
Now it varies day by day. Some weeks I might have 10 to 12. One week or one day I might have four. It really just depends on, who's admitted to the hospital. Do they need rehab? Are they from a facility? Are they from jail? It kind of just varies day by
Yeah,
day to week to week.
absolutely. I mean, it really, I just feel like it's like the core of social work, like the work that you're doing is so, it's exciting.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Now, you've mentioned that you were getting your MSW. Is your MSW something that you're needing in order to like keep going in social work? Like, how come you want to pursue it?
Um, I think when I first applied for my master's, it was definitely just engraved in my head that to get a better job than Child
Mm-hmm.
Protective Services, I have to have my master's and I have to have 2 years of experience. That was my core thought. And I went ham with that. Like I wasn't even graduated with my undergrad when I applied for my master's. It
Mm-hmm.
was very engraved in my stone. And I truly don't know if it was just me having high expectations for myself or it was taught to me just, you need to have your master's. I truly don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I still do think that in a way. So I did apply for my master's. I think I was in my master's for about a year and right before the fall term was about to pick up, I had to drop out.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of issues going on. One of them I'm very open to talk about. My grandmother got severely ill earlier that year. She broke, she had to have surgery, and she had to go to rehab. Once she got into rehab, my grandfather, who lived in the Philippines, passed away.
Oh.
And then we made the decision, or I made the decision as my grandmother's power of attorney, because she took a very deep dive into dementia,
Mm-hmm.
to make her long term because she was a total assist mass. So we made that decision very quick back to back. And then at that time, we also found out that our third worker was leaving. So I was trying to kind of prepare myself for the worst as well in my career of,
Wow.
we're going from 3 workers to 2. So it's going to be 2 workers in the field for our entire county. So I was trying to kind of prepare myself for the worst.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as bad as I was preparing myself to be, thankfully, but I still made that decision of my family also needs me. But also I still have children that
Mm-hmm.
I have to protect. And I'm also their advocate, but also I have loved ones that also has to be an advocate because on top of my grandmother, my dad's a stroke victim. So he, also requires a little bit of help too on half. So my mom and I are helping him. I'm helping my grandmother who's now trying to go to long term.
Oh my.
And we're trying to grieve my grandfather.
Mhm.
So it was a lot, but also we're going back down to 2 workers. So how am I going to make this all work?
Right.
So that's when I decided to kind of put a pause on my master's. And then once I,
100%.
yes,
Oh my.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm just thinking, like, I don't know people. I mean, people can be having a calm job and calm family life and still have a hard time also pursuing education. Like, I'm glad that you did that for yourself because sometimes we get so trapped in a timeline that we have or like these shoulds that we have for ourselves. And for you to be in that space, be like, nope, we're not doing it.
yeah.
It'll always be there.
I I'm such in a better place now. Like looking back at it, I knew that's what I could have done for myself because I feel like I am the person that always gives, gives, gives,
Hmm.
that I forget to do something for myself in regards to, being the caretaker for everyone, making sure my friends are okay, you know, just volunteering for everything. And there was one thing that I could do for me. Now I remember in that moment when I, um, dropped out, I was just like, what am I doing? Like, I had a timeline, I am supposed to quit my job in June and I don't have my master's. Like, I already pushed it back. What am I doing? I remember I made the phone call on the way back to my office from dropping off some kids from a visit, and I dropped out. And I remember going back to my office crying and going back to my supervisor and was like, well, I just dropped out of my master's. And then telling my parents, my friends, that was a whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back on it, it was the best thing that I could have done for myself. Do I regret it? No. And am I going to go back? Yes. I've had intentions of doing so. I just feel like it's never been the right time, to do so. And that's okay. I think that is what I'm trying to get through is, comparing myself to not just, other family members, my friends especially, but also other social workers I might not have my master's, but also in a way that I feel like I've accomplished a lot from graduating college at 20, starting CPS at 20, then going to another medical social work job at the age of 22. Like, I feel accomplished in that way, but also just like accepting that it's okay that I don't have my master's yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I also feel like the area that you're in, I've noticed because I'm originally from a very rural area as well. I don't know anyone that has their master's there,
Yeah.
Because social work roles are so needed, like you really just need your bachelor's. And it's one of those things where it'll always be there. No rush, because you have the experience, it's not like you're 60 years old just coming back into social work out of a completely other career. You're only 23.
Yes. And talking to my new coworkers at the hospital, they have given me so much confidence in that way in regards to, especially the other social worker. She doesn't have her bachelor's of social work, but she is a social worker and she is so incredibly experienced. It's not even funny, but also to kind of just see her and having conversations between the two of us of, I'm not discrediting anyone with their masters, but also just that experience now in social work is so valuable. It's so needed that in a way that, they might take you with your bachelor's, but you have, maybe 15 years of experience compared to maybe someone who has their master's, but maybe has 1 year. Which that's an incredible achievement to have your master's because that's a lot of work. But also just, it's nice to see that in a different perspective of how social work is also viewed now of, what is their experience compared to their education, but also what is their education as well. I think those are two of the most important factors now in social work, and it's great to see, but also to see and hear other social workers also agree and see that too.
Absolutely. It's being able to hold both because they're both valuable. That's great. I wonder, with your experience that you've had, how has that shaped your approach as a social worker?
I think tremendously. I feel like looking back, on Child Protective Services, I was just like, how am I even helping? But also, I was an ongoing worker, so I was able to see those success stories. I was able to see children returning back to their parents, being adopted, whatever that was. And that was so crucial, so invaluable to me because I could see myself as an advocate, whether that was in court, whether that was with the parents, with the children. And it just melted my heart when I went to a home visit with the children and they were like, Miss Anna, can you come read a book with me? Can you read a book to me? Can you play with me? When I would sit on the floor and really engage with them, those were like some core memories for me that I will always hold. But also, the adoptions, returning, families, reuniting them, but also getting, those little messages throughout the day from old clients that were success stories and be like, I remember, like, thank you, like, you changed my life for the better.
Oh,
That was like a core memory for me.
hmm
But also with my grandmother, she's in the nursing home long term now, but, advocating for her needs changed my perspective entirely because I was so focused on the young population that I didn't even want to work with the aging population, but now I do. I'm involved with it so much that I'm an advocate for my grandmother, but
hmm
also seeing how you can be an advocate for both, even though you're so like focused on one field,
hmm
um, both jobs. So, having those core memories with Child Protective Services and now with my grandmother, but also in my hospital job of, um, you know, I don't think this is a safe plan for you. How could, how do you think you can be safe at home? Where do you think you would be safe at? Whether that's, talking, not really talking to them, but, encouraging, advocating that, right now, I don't think home is successful for you. Let's maybe talk about rehab for a couple days, a
hmm
couple weeks, or, let's maybe think about home health or, finding those resources like transportation, utilities, like stuff like that, and just being an advocate for them, but also know that they have the right to make their own choice, but also that their family doesn't always make those decisions. So being an advocate for that patient has really just changed it all for me because you know, as social workers, we are advocates. It's
hmm
so important to be an advocate, but also it's so easy to hear, you're not a miracle worker.
hmm
It's so easy to hear it. I mean, we probably hear it all the time and we probably always say it all the time. But when you're in a situation where you're like, I'm really not a miracle worker, it brings so much light into it because you also just have to advocate how you feel and what
hmm
is best for the patient and just accepting and knowing that, we're not miracle workers. We can't fix a problem overnight, but
hmm
also knowing that we provided, whether that's a child, an adult, an elderly person, we provided all the resources that we can to them.
hmm
And then, whatever they decide, whether it's a parent, whether it's an adult, whatever they decide, it is their decision. And they have that right and to be at peace with that.
Yeah.
But also just knowing that you advocated as much as you can.
hmm That's such a core tenet to social work that I think we often forget. Like, I just feel like we can get so bogged down with the work that we're just like,
Hmm.
let's advocate, like
Yes.
it's so important. Oh, God. Now, as we kind of wrap up, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your fellow social workers?
Oh my.
I know
Um,
it's a hard question.
I will go with what I just said.
Mhm.
So, were you ever told the starfish story?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
I remember this.
So, so for those who do not know the starfish story, it talks about a little boy who is at the beach
Mm,
and it was covered with starfish. And there was a person on the said beach with this little boy. Um, and the little boy took a starfish and threw it back in the ocean. And the man was just like, why are you throwing it in? You can't, like, there's just more. And the little boy was just like, well, at least helps that one person.
mhm,
And I feel like that's a very cliche story in social work. But it's so true because when we get, whether you're child protective services, you're in medical, whether you're in school, whether you're in private practice, international victim advocacy, no matter what field you're in social
mhm,
work, the caseload can be it can carry a lot of weight. And I feel like we all feel that as social workers, no matter where we live or what country is, that caseload is always going to be bigger than we are.
mhm,
But to just know that, we're not miracle workers. And it's always, like I said, it's always easy to hear and say that, but to really process that takes a lot. Um, So be easy on yourself, but also know that at the end of the day, um, whether you lay your head down on the pillow or whatnot, whether, a child, was removed from their family for the better good, whether that was a person refused any services and just wanted to go home, or they left the nursing home, or a little kid doesn't want to talk about their parents, or, your client in your practice doesn't want to open up to you yet. That's for the better good. And it's not on you as a social worker. You're not a miracle worker. Build that rapport, but also continue to advocate for them, but also to them.
Mm-hmm.
Advocate who you are, and also be proud of that. I feel like a lot of social workers feel like that. We are very overlooked as a profession. But I will say what's been very eye-opening to me going into medical social work is, I work with case managers that are nurses, and they tell me I couldn't be a social worker. Or, they call me a social worker, but I didn't go to school for that. That is not, that is something else, and I respect that. So, and I feel like that is so good to hear from, especially a nurse who is also overlooked, but also they are vocal, very vocal compared to social workers. So my advice is always advocate, not just to your patient, but for your patient, but also for yourself, because we're not miracle workers. We're never going to be, but also there's always going to be that one starfish. And at the end of the day, that is what matters, whether that's, that one starfish comes once a month, once a week, quarterly, whatever that matters. Like at the end of the day, you are here in this profession. So advocate for you, but also advocate yourself to your patients, clients, children, families.
Absolutely. That's so important. It's just like the core that we often forget.
Yes.
But it's so important to find that purpose too. Like this work is valuable. It's so important. And I think we can get really discouraged when we're not maybe seeing the results that we want, but it's good work.
Yes, yes, it is.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for coming on today. I feel like you're so young and you have such incredible experience already.
Thank you. I truly appreciate that.
Oh, that's so exciting. Now for those listening, can they follow your journey anywhere?
Yes, you could follow me on Instagram. It's AnnWeb_.
Perfect. All right. And for those of you listening, if you enjoyed today's podcast episode, please feel free to like, share, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Anna's Instagram will be linked down below, so you can go give her a follow as well. And we will see you next time.